Welcome to History Before Bed. Tonight's bedtime story is on the life of Walt Disney. We hope to lull you to sleep as you relax and imagine pieces of history. Good night. Chapter 1. Early Dreams and Artistic Beginnings. Walt Disney was born on December 5, 1901, in a modest two-story home on the northwest side of Chicago. The fourth of five children, he grew up in a time when the city was bustling with industry, its skyline steadily rising above the banks of Lake Michigan. Yet, despite the vibrancy of urban life, it was the rural landscape of Marceline, Missouri, where Walt's heart truly lay. In 1906, the Disney family moved to this small, bucolic town, seeking the simple life that only the country could offer. Marceline was a place where the air was fresh, the nights were still, and the fields stretched endlessly beneath a wide-open sky. It was here, among the gentle hills and quiet cornfields, that young Walt's imagination began to blossom. He spent his days exploring the farm, chasing after butterflies, and watching the cows graze lazily in the sun. There was something magical about the rhythm of life in Marceline, something that spoke to Walt in a way that the clamor of Chicago never could. It was as if the world itself was a story waiting to be told, and Walt, even as a boy, yearned to be its storyteller. Walt's earliest memories were filled with color and light, sunsets that turned the sky into a canvas of reds and golds, the vivid green of the fields in spring, the deep blues of the night sky dotted with stars. These images stayed with him, finding their way into the sketches he began making as soon as he could hold a pencil. His first drawings were simple: barnyard animals, trees, the occasional self-portrait, but they were filled with a sense of wonder that set them apart. Walt wasn't just drawing what he saw, he was capturing how those things made him feel. His love for drawing was encouraged by his Aunt Margaret, who provided him with art supplies and praised his efforts. At school, he was often found sketching in the margins of his notebooks, his mind drifting from his lessons to the images taking shape on the page. His teachers noticed his talent, and by the time he was 7 years old, he was already selling his drawings to neighbors for a few pennies. It was the first time Walt realized that his passion could be more than just a pastime. It could be a way of life. But life on the farm wasn't always idyllic. Walt's father, Elias Disney, was a stern and demanding man, more interested in hard work than in fanciful pursuits. He expected his children to contribute to the farm, and Walt often found himself waking before dawn to help with the chores. The work was grueling, and there were days when Walt longed to escape into his drawings. Yet, despite the long hours and the calluses on his hands, he never lost his love for art. If anything, the hardships of farm life only deepened his resolve to make something of himself. In 1911, when Walt was 10 years old, the Disney family left Marceline and moved to Kansas City. It was a difficult transition for Walt, who missed the wide-open spaces of the farm. Kansas City was a bustling, noisy place, and the family struggled to make ends meet. Elias purchased a newspaper delivery route, and Walt, along with his brother Roy, helped deliver the papers before and after school. The route was long, stretching for miles across the city, and the winters were particularly harsh. The boys would rise at 4:30 in the morning, regardless of the weather, to complete their deliveries. It was exhausting work, but Walt did it without complaint, driven by a determination to help his family and perhaps, one day, to escape the drudgery of his circumstances. Amidst these struggles, Walt found solace in his art. He enrolled in art classes at the Kansas City Art Institute on Saturdays, where he honed his skills and learned new techniques. He also developed a fascination with the world of entertainment, particularly vaudeville and early motion pictures. He was captivated by the moving images on the screen, the way they seemed to bring stories to life. It was during these years that Walt began to dream of a career in art, not as a mere hobby, but as a way to tell stories, to create worlds of his own. By the time he reached high school, Walt had already set his sights on a future in commercial art. He contributed cartoons to his school's newspaper, and when he was 16, he attempted to enlist in the army during World War I, lying about his age to do so. He was rejected due to his youth, but he managed to join the Red Cross as an ambulance driver in 1918. The war took him far from Kansas City, to the battle-scarred streets of France. where he spent a year ferrying the wounded. Even in the midst of the devastation, Walt's creative spirit never waned. He covered his ambulance with cartoons and drawings, bringing a touch of humor to an otherwise grim environment. Returning to Kansas City in 1919, Walt was more determined than ever to pursue his passion. He found work at the Pessman Rubin Commercial Art Studio, where he met Iwerks, a fellow artist who would become his lifelong collaborator. Together, they started their own company, Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists, but it quickly failed. Undeterred, Walt took a job at the Kansas City Film Ad Company, where he began experimenting with animation, a relatively new and uncharted field at the time. He was fascinated by the potential of this medium, by the way it could bring drawings to life. He studied everything he could about animation, spending long hours perfecting his technique. In 1922, Walt decided to take a leap of faith. He founded his own studio, Laugh-O-Gram Films, where he began producing a series of short cartoons based on fairy tales. The studio's first production, Little Red Riding Hood, was a modest success, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though Walt was on the verge of realizing his dreams. But the business side of animation proved challenging. Despite his creative talents, Walt struggled to keep the studio afloat. Within a year, Laugh-O-Gram was bankrupt, and Walt was left with nothing but a suitcase full of drawings and a one-way ticket to Hollywood. In the summer of 1923, Walt Disney boarded a train bound for California. He was 21 years old, penniless, and still reeling from the failure of his first studio. But he carried with him a vision, a belief that animation could be more than just a novelty, that it could be a powerful tool for storytelling. He arrived in Los Angeles with nothing to his name but an unshakable determination to succeed. Little did he know, the journey he was beginning would change the world forever. Chapter 2. The Birth of Mickey Mouse and Disney Studios. When Walt Disney stepped off the train in Los Angeles in 1923, he was greeted by the bright California sun and the vast possibilities of Hollywood, a place where dreams seemed as plentiful as the palm trees lining the streets. He had little more than a few dollars in his pocket and an unwavering belief in the power of animation to tell stories that could captivate audiences of all ages. It was here, with his older brother Roy by his side, that Walt began to build what would become one of the most iconic entertainment empires in history. Walt and Roy rented a small office in a nondescript building on Kingswell Avenue and set up shop as the Disney Brothers Studio. The early years were anything but easy. Animation was still a fledgling industry, and the competition was fierce. Walt quickly realized that to survive, they needed to create something that would set them apart from the countless other studios vying for attention. Their first significant success came with the creation of a series of shorts based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, blending live action and animation in a way that had never been seen before. The Alice comedies garnered enough interest to keep the studio afloat, but Walt knew they needed something more to break through. By 1927, Walt had developed a new character that he believed would take the studio to the next level: Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Oswald was a lively, mischievous character whose antics quickly won over audiences. The shorts were distributed by Universal Pictures, and for a time, it seemed as though Walt had finally found the success he had been chasing. However, in early 1928, Walt learned a harsh lesson about the business side of Hollywood. Universal, holding the rights to Oswald, had secretly negotiated with Walt's animators, luring them away with promises of higher pay. When Walt confronted his distributor, he was told bluntly that Universal owned Oswald and could continue producing the cartoons without him. Walt had lost his creation, and with it, much of his workforce. It was a devastating blow, but it also sparked a new determination in Walt. He vowed never to be in a position where someone else controlled his work. On the long train ride back from New York to California, with his future uncertain, Walt began to sketch a new character. A little mouse with big round ears and a mischievous grin. By the time the train reached Los Angeles, Mickey Mouse had been born. Mickey Mouse wasn't just another cartoon character. He was the embodiment of Walt's spirit, a symbol of resilience and creativity. Alongside Iwerks, who had stayed loyal through the Oswald debacle, Walt poured all his energy into bringing Mickey to life. The first two Mickey cartoons, Plain Crazy and The Gallopin' Gaucho, failed to find a distributor. But Walt had one more trick up his sleeve. Inspired by the recent introduction of synchronized sound in film, he decided to make Mickey the star of the first sound cartoon. The result was Steamboat Willie, which premiered at the Colony Theater in New York on November 18, 1928. Steamboat Willie was an instant sensation. Audiences were enthralled by the combination of animation and sound, which brought Mickey to life in a way that had never been seen before. The film's success catapulted Mickey Mouse into stardom and established the Disney Brothers studio as a major player in the animation industry. The studio quickly became a hive of activity, with animators working around the clock to produce new Mickey shorts that delighted audiences across the country. As Mickey Mouse became a household name, Walt's ambitions grew. He wasn't content with simply making short cartoons. He wanted to push the boundaries of what animation could achieve. In 1929, the Disney Brothers studio was officially renamed Walt Disney Productions, reflecting Walt's growing role as the creative force behind the company. The studio continued to innovate, producing the Silly Symphonies series, which combined music and animation in ways that were both whimsical and technically groundbreaking. The most famous of these was The Skeleton Dance, released in 1929, which showcased the studio's ability to synchronize complex animation with a musical score. But Walt's most audacious project was still to come. By the mid-1930s, he had set his sights on producing a full-length animated feature, a feat that had never been attempted before. The idea was met with skepticism from all sides. Industry insiders dubbed it Disney's folly, predicting that audiences would never sit through a feature-length cartoon. The financial risk was enormous, and even Roy, ever the cautious businessman, had his doubts. But Walt was undeterred. He believed in the power of storytelling, and he was convinced that animation could evoke emotions just as powerfully as live-action films. Work on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs began in 1934. The production was a massive undertaking, involving hundreds of artists and animators, many of whom were trained in the studio's newly established art school. The film pushed the boundaries of animation, utilizing techniques like multiplane cameras to create depth and dimension, and experimenting with color and shading to bring the characters to life. Walt was involved in every aspect of the production, from the storyboarding process to the character designs, ensuring that every detail met his high standards. By the time Snow White premiered on December 21, 1937, the studio was on the brink of financial ruin. The film had cost nearly $1.5 million, an astronomical sum for the time, and Walt had poured everything into it. But as the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, the audience was transported into a world of magic and wonder. When the film ended, there was no doubt that Walt's gamble had paid off. The audience erupted in applause, and even the critics who had once doubted him were left in awe. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a triumph, becoming the highest-grossing film of all time until Gone with the Wind surpassed it a few years later. The success of Snow White transformed Walt Disney Productions from a small animation studio into a major force in Hollywood. With the profits from the film, Walt began work on a state-of-the-art studio in Burbank, where he could continue to push the boundaries of animation. The film's success also cemented Walt's reputation as a visionary, someone who could see possibilities where others saw only risks. By the end of 1937, Walt Disney had achieved what many thought impossible. He had created a beloved character in Mickey Mouse, revolutionized the animation industry with synchronized sound, and proved that a cartoon could hold its own against the biggest live-action films of the day. But for Walt, this was only the beginning. The empire he had begun to build would grow far beyond what anyone could have imagined as he continued to dream up new ways to bring stories to life. Power of imagination, the importance of storytelling, and the conviction that, with enough creativity and determination, anything was possible. Chapter 3. Innovation and Expansion. As America emerged from the shadows of the Great Depression, the nation found itself on the brink of profound transformation. The 1940s and 1950s were a time of rapid technological advancement and shifting cultural tides, and at the heart of this era of change was Walt Disney, whose restless creativity and relentless pursuit of innovation continued to shape the landscape of entertainment. By 1937, with the unprecedented success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Walt Disney had firmly established himself as a visionary in the world of animation. But as the world around him changed, so too did Walt's ambitions. No longer content with just creating films, he began to imagine new ways to bring his stories to life, on a scale that had never been seen before. The years following Snow White were marked by both triumph and struggle for Walt Disney Productions. The studio produced a string of animated classics, including Pinocchio (1940), Fantasia (1940), Dumbo (1941), and Bambi (1942). Each film pushed the boundaries of animation, exploring new techniques and storytelling methods. However, despite their artistic achievements, these films were not immediate financial successes. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 exacerbated the studio's financial woes, cutting off much of the European market that had been crucial to the success of Snow White. As the war progressed, the studio faced even greater challenges, with many of its animators drafted into military service and its resources stretched thin. During the war, the Disney studio was contracted by the U.S. government to produce propaganda and training films. While these projects kept the studio afloat, they were far from the creative endeavors that Walt had envisioned. Films like Victory Through Air Power, 1943, and Der Führer's Face, 1943, were essential to the war effort, but they lacked the magic and whimsy that had defined Disney's earlier work. The war years were a difficult time for Walt, who found himself increasingly frustrated by the constraints placed on his creativity. Yet, even in the midst of these challenges, his mind never stopped churning with new ideas. As the war came to an end in 1945, Walt turned his attention to rebuilding and expanding his studio. He was determined to diversify the company's output and began exploring new avenues beyond animation. In 1948, Disney released So Dear to My Heart, a film that combined live action and animation, marking the studio's growing interest in live-action productions. This was followed by the release of Treasure Island, 1950, Disney's first full-length live-action feature. The success of these films opened up new possibilities for the studio, allowing Walt to experiment with different genres and formats. At the same time, Walt began to recognize the potential of a new medium, television. The rise of television in the early 1950s presented both a challenge and an opportunity for the entertainment industry. While many in Hollywood saw television as a threat, Walt saw it as a chance to reach a broader audience and to experiment with new forms of storytelling. In 1954, he launched Disneyland, a weekly television show that not only showcased the studio's work, but also served as a promotional vehicle for his most ambitious project yet, a theme park that would bring his characters and stories to life in a way that had never been done before. The idea for Disneyland had been simmering in Walt's mind for years. He had long dreamed of creating a place where families could experience the magic of Disney together, a place where the worlds he had created on screen could become tangible. His initial inspiration came from visits to amusement parks with his daughters in the 1930s, where he had noticed a lack of cleanliness and creativity. Walt envisioned something different, a park that was clean, safe, and filled with the same sense of wonder and imagination that characterized his films. In 1953, Walt gathered a small team of designers, engineers, and artists, whom he dubbed Imagineers, to begin developing his vision. The project was risky and unprecedented. No one had ever attempted anything on the scale that Walt was proposing. He faced skepticism from both his business partners and the public, many of whom doubted that the project would succeed. Financing the park proved difficult, and Walt had to leverage his personal assets, including borrowing against his life insurance, to fund its construction. He also struck a deal with the ABC television network to help finance the park in exchange for producing the Disneyland television series. Construction on Disneyland began in July 1954 in Anaheim, California, on a 160-acre orange grove. The project moved at a breakneck pace, with just over a year to complete the park before its scheduled opening. The construction site was a flurry of activity, with workers racing to meet deadlines and overcome countless obstacles, from budget overruns to technical challenges. Throughout it all, Walt was a constant presence, overseeing every detail and inspiring his team with his infectious enthusiasm. Finally, on July 17, 1955, Disneyland opened its gates to the public. The opening day was plagued with problems: plumbing issues, overcrowding, and extreme heat, but despite the glitches, Disneyland was an instant success. The park was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before, a place where fantasy and reality blended seamlessly, where visitors could step into the worlds of their favorite films and meet beloved characters in person. From the iconic Sleeping Beauty Castle to the futuristic Tomorrowland, every corner of Disneyland was filled with the kind of magic that only Walt Disney could create. Disneyland's success exceeded even Walt's expectations. It quickly became a cultural phenomenon, drawing millions of visitors from around the world. The park was not just an amusement park. It was a new kind of entertainment experience, one that combined storytelling, technology, and design in a way that set the standard for the industry. Disneyland's impact was profound, reshaping the entertainment landscape and solidifying Walt's legacy as a pioneer not only in animation but in the broader world of entertainment. The opening of Disneyland marked the beginning of a new era for Walt Disney Productions. With the park thriving, Walt continued to expand his empire, exploring new ventures in television, film, and beyond. The success of the Davy Crockett miniseries in 1955 and the launch of the Mickey Mouse Club that same year further cemented Disney's dominance in the burgeoning television market. These ventures brought Disney's brand of family-friendly entertainment into millions of homes, creating a generation of loyal fans. By the end of the 1950s, Walt Disney was not just a filmmaker, he was a cultural icon, a man whose name had become synonymous with imagination and innovation. His empire had grown far beyond the small animation studio he and Roy had started in 1923, encompassing film, television, merchandise, and of course, Disneyland. But for Walt, the journey was far from over. He continued to dream of new possibilities, new ways to bring his stories to life, and new frontiers to explore. The seeds of future projects, including plans for a larger, more ambitious park in Florida and ideas for a futuristic city, were already beginning to take root in his mind. As the 1950s gave way to the 1960s, Walt Disney stood at the pinnacle of his career. He had transformed the entertainment industry, creating an empire that would continue to grow and evolve long after he was gone. Yet, even as he looked ahead to the future, he never lost sight of the values that had guided him from the very beginning: the belief in the power of imagination, the importance of storytelling, and the conviction that with enough creativity and determination, anything was possible. Chapter 4: Legacy and the Magic Kingdom. As the 1960s dawned, America found itself in a period of profound transformation. The country was on the brink of social upheaval, with the civil rights movement gaining momentum, the space race capturing the nation's imagination, and the counterculture challenging traditional norms. Amidst this rapidly changing landscape, Walt Disney remained a constant, a visionary whose boundless creativity and relentless drive had already reshaped the entertainment industry. But even as he approached his twilight years, Walt's ambitions continued to grow. The man who had brought the world Mickey Mouse and Disneyland was far from finished. He was dreaming bigger than ever before. By the early 1960s, Walt Disney Productions had become a sprawling empire, with successes in film, television, theme parks, and merchandising. Yet, Walt was increasingly focused on creating experiences that went beyond mere entertainment. He envisioned places that would immerse people in a world of innovation, imagination, and progress. Central to this vision was his boldest idea yet: the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, or Epcot. Walt's interest in urban planning and community development had deepened over the years. He was fascinated by the problems plaguing modern cities: traffic congestion, pollution, and the lack of efficient public services. He believed that with enough creativity and foresight, these issues could be solved, and he wanted to use his unique blend of storytelling and technology to build a city of the future. Epcot was not just a theme park in Walt's mind. It was a living, breathing community where people would live, work, and interact in harmony. It would be a place where cutting-edge technology met traditional values, where the lessons of the past could be combined with the possibilities of the future to create a model for a better world. The idea for Epcot began to take shape as Walt pursued plans for an even larger project in Florida. In 1963, he quietly acquired vast tracts of land in Central Florida, far from the hustle and bustle of Orlando. The secrecy surrounding the land purchases fueled speculation, but few could have guessed the scope of what Walt had in mind. The Florida Project, as it was known internally, would include not only a new theme park, Walt Disney World, but also the innovative Epcot community at its heart. Walt envisioned Epcot as a place where new ideas and technologies would be tested and showcased, where people from around the world could come to see what the future might hold. Walt spent countless hours refining his plans for Epcot, poring over blueprints, consulting with architects and engineers, and envisioning a city that would operate like a well-oiled machine. He imagined a radial design, with a central hub of business and commerce surrounded by residential neighborhoods. Transportation would be provided by monorails and people movers, eliminating the need for cars and reducing pollution. The community would be constantly evolving, with new technologies being integrated as they became available. For Walt, Epcot was more than just a concept. It was a tangible expression of his belief that the future could be brighter, cleaner, and more efficient than the present. At the same time, Walt continued to expand the reach of his entertainment empire. The 1960s saw the release of several successful live-action films, including Mary Poppins, 1964, which combined live-action with animation and became one of the highest-grossing films of the decade. The studio also expanded its presence on television, producing a wide range of programming that appealed to audiences of all ages. The success of shows like The Wonderful World of Disney and Zorro demonstrated that Disney's brand of family-friendly entertainment was as popular as ever. But even as Walt pursued these projects, his health began to decline. Years of smoking had taken their toll, and in 1966, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Despite the severity of his illness, Walt refused to slow down. He continued to work on the Florida Project, determined to see his vision for Epcot come to life. In his final months, he spent much of his time at the studio, reviewing plans and giving instructions to his team. Those who worked with him during this time remember his unwavering focus and his refusal to let illness stand in the way of his dreams. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney passed away at the age of 65, leaving behind a legacy that was as vast as it was varied. His death sent shockwaves through the company and the world. For many, it was difficult to imagine a world without Walt's guiding hand, without his endless stream of ideas and his uncanny ability to turn dreams into reality. Yet, even in his absence, Walt's influence continued to shape the future of his company. After Walt's death, the future of Epcot and Walt Disney World hung in the balance. Some within the company doubted that the ambitious plans for Epcot could be realized without Walt's leadership. But Roy Disney, Walt's older brother and lifelong business partner, was determined to see his brother's vision fulfilled. Roy came out of semi-retirement to oversee the completion of the Florida Project, ensuring that it stayed true to Walt's original ideas. On October 1, 1971, Walt Disney World opened its doors to the public, with the Magic Kingdom as its centerpiece. The park was an immediate success, drawing visitors from around the world and solidifying Disney's place as a leader in the entertainment industry. Epcot, however, did not take the form that Walt had originally envisioned. The ambitious plan for a working city was scaled back after his death, and the project was reimagined as a theme park dedicated to innovation, demonstrating international culture, and the future. When Epcot Center finally opened in 1982, it was a tribute to Walt's ideals, even if it wasn't the living community he had imagined. The park featured attractions that celebrated human achievement and technological progress, and it quickly became one of the most popular destinations in Walt Disney World. Walt Disney's influence extended far beyond the parks, films, and television shows he created. He transformed the way people thought about entertainment, blending art, technology, and storytelling in ways that had never been done before. His commitment to quality and his belief in the power of imagination set a standard that continues to guide the company he founded. The principles that Walt lived by, innovation, creativity, and a relentless pursuit of excellence, remain at the heart of the Walt Disney Company, driving it forward as it continues to entertain and inspire millions around the globe. As the 1960s drew to a close, America was once again on the cusp of change. The optimism of the post-war years had given way to the turbulence of the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the countercultural revolution. Yet, through it all, Walt Disney's creations provided a sense of continuity and comfort. His stories, characters, and worlds offered a refuge from the uncertainties of the time, a place where dreams could come true and where the future still held the promise of wonder and joy. Walt Disney's legacy is one of enduring creativity and innovation. From the creation of Mickey Mouse to the opening of Disneyland, from the pioneering use of sound and color in animation to the development of immersive theme parks, Walt's contributions to entertainment are unparalleled. But perhaps his greatest legacy is the belief that with enough imagination, anything is possible. A belief that continues to inspire generations of dreamers, creators, and innovators around the world.
Thank you for joining me tonight on History Before Bed. I hope you found our journey through the past both intriguing and restful. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what story you'd like to hear next. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next episode. Good night.